The line sat there on the page longer than it should have. $1. She knows why. I read it again, slower this time, as if the words might soften if I gave them patience. They didn't. The paper felt heavier in my hands than any check ever could. What does that mean? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. No one answered. No one needed to. The room had already decided this was none of my business. The attorney cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. That concludes the preliminary notice, he said, professionally detached. Chairs shifted. A pen tapped once against polished wood. Somewhere behind me, someone exhaled in quiet amusement. If you're listening right now, pause for a second and tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story have traveled. My name is Aria Blackwell. I am 34 years old. I work in digital forensic accounting, which means I spend my days following money that was designed to disappear. I know how numbers hide. I know how silence is engineered. I just never expected to hear it spoken so clearly by my own family. Across the table, Prescott Voss Blackwell leaned back in his chair, one arm resting easily on the leather. Well, he said with a faint smile, your grandfather always had a flair for drama. I looked up then. Is that what you call this? Prescott's smile widened. I call it closure. My mother, Serafina, didn't look at me. She was focused on the attorney, her posture flawless, grief arranged into something respectable. Aria, she said calmly, this isn't the time to make things uncomfortable. Uncomfortable for whom? I asked. She met my eyes then, sharp and warning. For the family. Lenora shifted beside her, fingers twisting together. Aria, please, she said softly. This isn't helping. Grandpa's gone. We all just want to move forward. I studied her face, the careful tremor in her voice, the way she avoided looking directly at the document in front of me. Forward to where? I asked, because this feels like backward accounting. No one laughed out loud, but Prescott did chuckle under his breath. You always had a way with words, he said. That doesn't mean they're useful. The room smelled faintly of old wood and expensive cologne. Outside the windows, Newport's sky hung low and gray, the ocean barely visible beyond the estate grounds. Everything about the setting suggested permanence. Everything about that line on the paper suggested erasure. 17 years earlier, I learned how easily a story can be rewritten. I was 17, hiding in the library while rain hammered against the windows. I remember the sound of voices drifting from the study, low and deliberate. Prescott was speaking. My mother answered. They weren't whispering because they didn't expect anyone to be listening. He'll never notice, Prescott said. The clause is outdated. It protects the foundation, my mother replied. It restricts it, he corrected. And restriction is inefficiency. When I repeated those words days later, the reaction wasn't anger. It was concern. It was sympathy. It was a decision made without me in the room. You've always been sensitive, my mother told me then. You hear things differently. I left not because I was told to, but because staying meant accepting their version of reality. I built my life elsewhere. I paid for my education. I learned to read financial systems the way others read faces. When my last employer decided I was inconvenient, they erased me with a single fabricated image and a carefully worded HR meeting. And then my grandfather died. 3 days after the funeral, my phone lit up with a message from a number I hadn't seen in years. Marlo Sutter, Dorian's attorney. Do not trust the dollar, the message read. Do not sign anything. This was planned. I stared at my screen for a long time before replying. Planned how? The response came almost immediately. Your grandfather believed truth required timing. So I drove back to Newport through cold rain that blurred the road into long gray streaks. I didn't come back to reclaim a place at the table. I came back because someone had written a line meant only for me. $1 was never the point. It was an invitation, and I intended to answer it. I went back to my old email account out of habit at first. The way you test a door you already know should be locked. It wasn't. My mother had never revoked the guest permissions she once granted to household staff, vendors, and assistants, because she never imagined I would still have access, and she never imagined I would need it. That was her mistake. The family calendar loaded slowly, years of color-coded authority filling the screen. Meetings, charity dinners, board calls, vacations disguised as obligations. I scrolled with the patience I'd learned on long investigations, letting patterns surface instead of forcing them. Then, one entry stopped me. Prescott, Home Office, private call with Zurich. I said the word out loud. Zurich. Switzerland meant discretion, but Prescott never moved money the old way. Bank wires left trails, and trails invited questions. A man like him preferred distance and deniability, which meant digital bridges first and clean currency later. Crypto would be the spine of it, invisible unless you knew where to press. I pulled up the bank statements again, slower this time, combing line by line. There were no transfers to exchanges, no obvious ramps, nothing that would trigger an automatic flag. It was almost elegant. Almost. Then I saw the IT payments, $20,000 a month, steady as a heartbeat, routed to a company called Blockframe Solutions. I leaned back in my chair and smiled despite myself. Real IT firms billed erratically. Infrastructure costs spiked and dipped. This was too consistent, too clean. I ran a corporate trace on Blockframe. The website was polished, the language vague, the client list impressive in that meaningless way. Underneath it, the registration data told a different story. Blockframe didn't build systems, it hosted them. High-frequency trading bots, wallet infrastructure, private liquidity pipelines. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the shape of it settle. Ah, of course, I murmured. I launched my forensic tools, the ones my former firm used to license at a price that made clients wince. The code scrolled fast, my laptop fan whining like it was preparing for takeoff. I scraped the blockchain for wallets tied to Blockframe's known deposit addresses, widening the net in controlled increments. It took hours. My water went warm, my shoulders tightened. Then the hit appeared. One wallet. Anonymous. Unremarkable at first glance. Over 2 years, it had received just under $3 million in Tether, broken into irregular deposits that mimicked market activity. The outflow was careful, filtered through mixers, fragmented just enough to look like noise. Just enough. Everyone makes one mistake. In this case, it was a single transfer that didn't belong. 10.01 Bitcoin, sent directly to a luxury watch dealer in London. No mixer, no delay, no disguise. I pulled the dealer's sales records, then opened Prescott's social media feed. The photo was from last year, posted casually, as if it meant nothing. He stood in his office, cuff slightly raised, wrist angled toward the camera. A limited edition piece. The caption read, "A little gift to myself." I overlaid the transaction hash on the image, matching timestamp to purchase window, price to market rate. The alignment was perfect. I exhaled slowly. "Got you," I said to the empty room. I compiled everything into a single encrypted dossier and named it Project Icarus, because flying too close to the sun always ends the same way. Then I set the timed release. If I didn't log in every 12 hours, the file would go out automatically to the IRS, the SEC, and an investigative newsroom that still knew how to read numbers. Insurance wasn't paranoia. It was survival. By the time I finished, it was nearly 3 a.m. My eyes burned, my back ached, but the work was clean, precise. I stood and walked to the small motel closet, punched in the default code on the safe, and took out the brass key my grandfather had left me. It was heavier than it looked, cool against my palm. Not money, not comfort, leverage. I held it up to the light for a moment, then set it on the nightstand. The sound it made against the wood was dull and final, like something being chambered. I lay down fully dressed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep, I rehearsed. I imagined the conference room, Prescott's relaxed posture, my mother's careful concern, Lenora's practiced sadness. I imagined the laughter, the easy certainty that they had already won. Let them, I whispered into the dark. Tomorrow, I wouldn't interrupt them. I wouldn't accuse or explain. I would let them talk. I would let them smile. I would let them reveal themselves without knowing they were doing it. Because the truth doesn't need volume. It only needs timing. The Blackwell estate rose out of the rain like something designed to repel confession. Gray stone, slate roof, narrow windows facing the Atlantic, as if the house itself had learned to distrust the world. The ocean beyond it was restless and dark, its sound muffled by thick walls that had absorbed decades of secrets without complaint. Inside, the air was warm and amber-toned, heavy with the smell of expensive liquor and a confidence that bordered on celebration. "Come in," Prescott called when he saw me, lifting his glass slightly. "You picked a miserable night." "I didn't mind the drive," I said, closing the door behind me. He was standing near the fireplace, already flushed, a tumbler of dark liquid in his hand. "We opened one of your grandfather's bottles," he added, glancing at the label with open satisfaction. "Seemed appropriate. No reason to let it sit unused." Serafina watched me from the sofa, her expression carefully pleasant. "Have a drink, Arya," she said. "You look tense." "I'm fine," I replied, setting my bag down and remaining where I was. Lenora drifted closer, her voice soft enough to sound sincere. "I just want tomorrow to go smoothly," she said. "I'm tired of all this tension. Can't we try to be a family for once?" I met her eyes and held them. "Families don't work on scripts," I said. The room went quiet for a fraction of a second. Serafina rose smoothly and crossed toward me, her hand brushing my arm with a practiced intimacy. "You don't need to be defensive," she said. "We're only asking that you don't react impulsively. Your grandfather was difficult. He put us all in impossible positions." "I'll do exactly what he wanted," I said. Her fingers stilled. The smile on her face faltered just enough to reveal calculation underneath. "I need to use the restroom," I added, stepping away before she could respond. The hallway felt cooler, the noise from the living room fading behind me. My feet carried me past the guest bathroom without conscious decision. I stopped in front of the double oak doors at the end of the corridor. Dorian's study. It had always been off limits when I was younger, the place where conversations lowered and decisions hardened. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was stripped bare, the desk cleared, the drawers empty, the shelves neat in a way that felt wrong, like a crime scene cleaned too thoroughly. The smell of leather and old tobacco lingered, faint but unmistakable. I took 2 steps forward, then stopped. There was a small black dot on the spine of a book facing the desk. I leaned closer, heart tightening, and saw the edge of plastic film still clinging to the casing. I scanned the room slowly. Another lens sat above the curtain rod. A third hid among the leaves of a decorative fern near the door. New cameras, recently installed. They weren't protecting anything, they were waiting. The realization landed cleanly. They expected me to come here. They expected me to search for a hidden panel, a document, a safe. They wanted footage of me touching something they could label as theft before the will was even read. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I didn't hesitate. I turned sharply, grabbed the edge of the desk, and forced my breathing into shallow, uneven gasps. My knees buckled, and I let myself sink to the rug, clutching my chest as if the room itself had become unbearable. The door opened. "Arya!" Serafina's voice was sharp. "What are you doing in here?" "I can't breathe," I said, my voice breaking convincingly. "It smells like him. I shouldn't have come." She didn't kneel. She didn't reach for me. She sighed, irritation breaking through her composure. "For heaven's sake," she muttered. "Get up." "I need air," I said, scrambling to my feet and stumbling toward the door. She turned and raised her voice. "Prescott, come here. She's having one of her episodes." I didn't wait to hear his response. I pushed past her and ran. The garage was cold and dark, the smell of gasoline sharp. I ducked behind the family SUV and leaned against the concrete wall, dropping the act the moment I was out of sight. My breathing steadied. My hands stopped shaking. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marlo. "They're watching," I said the moment she answered. "The study is wired. Cameras everywhere." There was a pause. "Good," she said finally. "That means they're afraid. Leave now. Stick to the plan." "I am," I replied. The call ended just as my phone vibrated again. A text from an unfamiliar number. Kellen Rook. They forced me out. NDA, threats, the whole package. I can't help digitally anymore. My stomach tightened. Then another message followed. I didn't leave empty-handed. I made a physical drop. Box 91. Coastal Federal Bank in Providence. You'll understand when you see it. I stared at the screen, then reached into my bag for the folded paper I had carried since the funeral. I took out the letter and held my keychain light behind it. The watermark emerged slowly. Below it, a routing number. A chill moved through me, sharp and clarifying. My grandfather had anticipated this moment. He had built the center of the maze long before I knew I would need it. Prescott's voice echoed faintly from the house. "Arya, where did you go?" I slipped the letter back into my bag and stepped out from behind the SUV. "I'm leaving," I called calmly. "I'll see you tomorrow." Rain soaked my coat as I crossed the driveway. I didn't look back. From the car, I watched the lights of the estate blur through the downpour. They would think I had unraveled. They would think the cameras had done their job. They were wrong. Whatever they believed they were guarding, they had already lost it. The Coastal Federal Bank opened its doors at 8:15, and I walked inside as if I were entering a place that demanded reverence rather than transactions. The air smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper, a sterile calm that reminded me of libraries and courtrooms, places where voices lowered instinctively. Every sound carried weight. My shoes against marble, the quiet click of a pen, the distant hum of a vault breathing behind steel walls. The teller looked at my name, then at me, and nodded without asking a question. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as Mr. Henderson and led me through a series of secured doors. He walked with the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime protecting other people's secrets. "This way, Miss Blackwell," he said, his tone respectful but neutral. The vault opened with a sound that settled deep in my chest. Rows of metal boxes lined the walls, each one identical, each one holding a private version of truth. Mr. Henderson stopped in front of a drawer and gestured. "Box 91. I took the brass key from my pocket. It felt warmer now, as if my body had been holding it too long. Mr. Henderson inserted his master key, and I slid mine into the second lock. We turned them together. The mechanism clicked, slow and deliberate, and the drawer released. He carried the box into a small viewing room and placed it on the table. "Take your time," he said, then left me alone. I sat for a moment without touching it, letting the silence settle. Then I lifted the lid. There was no jewelry, no cash, no indulgence. Inside were 3 items arranged with intention: a black USB drive, a worn leather notebook, its edges softened by years of handling, and a white envelope with my name written in my grandfather's unmistakable hand. I reached for the letter first. The paper was thick, the kind he favored, and the seal broke with a faint crackle. His handwriting slanted slightly, confident even now. "Arya, if you are reading this, then you were brave enough to use the key." I felt my throat tighten as I continued. He wrote about the night 17 years ago, about standing just out of sight while Prescott and Serafina talked, about hearing the plan take shape, about understanding, in that moment, that truth had a cost he was not prepared to pay publicly. "I chose the company," he wrote. "I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would fix it later." Later never came. He admitted that letting me leave was not punishment, but containment. He believed that keeping me outside the system was the only way to keep me intact. He wrote that cold hardens things, that distance sharpens judgment. Then he explained the dollar. "In binary," he wrote, "1 is a signal, 0 is silence. They see the dollar as value. You know better. You are the signal." My hands shook slightly as I folded the letter and set it aside. I opened the leather notebook next. The pages were filled with columns of numbers, dates written carefully, transfers recorded without flourish. Month after month, year after year, every entry led to the same destination. A. Trust. At the back of the book, a summary page listed the structure. Blind trust. Custodian, Marlowe Sutter. Beneficiary, Arya Blackwell. Current asset value, $42,380,000. I stared at the number, waiting for relief to arrive. It didn't. I thought of the years I had budgeted groceries and delayed dental work. I thought of the loans I repaid slowly, deliberately, because independence mattered to me more than comfort. He had given me freedom without telling me, and in doing so, he had forced me to earn myself before I could inherit anything else. I closed the notebook. The USB drive was last. I plugged it into my laptop and waited as folders populated the screen, each one labeled by year. Inside were documents, communications, transaction records, all organized with surgical precision. Then I saw the audio file. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. His voice was weaker here, breath uneven, but his mind was sharp. "When Marlowe asks you," he said, "you must answer yes. Do not hesitate. Do not ask what it means. That word is consent, and consent is the trigger. The recording ended, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. I opened one more file, a video. The angle was low, hidden. Prescott and Serafina stood near a fireplace, wine glasses in hand. "The waiver holds," Prescott said. "Once they sign, there's no exposure. We're insulated." "Bulletproof?" my mother replied. I closed the laptop. The pattern was complete. The dollar was bait. The waiver was the lock. The word yes was the blade. I packed the contents back into my bag, leaving the box open as instructed. When Mr. Henderson returned, I met his eyes. "I may have more to deposit later today," I said. He nodded once. Outside, the sky was bruised but clearing. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the weight of what I carried settle into something steady. This was not inheritance, it was an assignment, and I was ready to walk into the room where the sentence would be read aloud, knowing exactly when to let it fall. The conference room sat high above Providence, wrapped in glass and confidence, the skyline stretching outward as if the city itself were invited to witness what was about to happen. Morning light cut across the table in sharp lines, catching on polished wood and polished egos. Prescott had taken the seat at the head of the table before anyone else arrived. He wore a dark suit tailored to signal authority, and on his wrist sat the watch he loved to display, the one he thought no one would ever question. He leaned back comfortably, fingers interlaced, already inhabiting the future he believed was guaranteed. Serafina arrived next, dressed in black that looked less like mourning and more like control. She placed her folder neatly in front of her and nodded once, a queen acknowledging the room. Lenora followed, eyes red, voice soft, a string of pearls resting at her throat. I recognized them immediately. They had belonged to Dorian. She touched them as if they were armor. Two attorneys sat close to Prescott, their posture predatory, their briefcases open like open mouths. In the corner, a man in an inexpensive suit sat quietly with a legal pad, head lowered, pen moving steadily. No one paid him any attention. Marlowe entered last. The room adjusted around her, without anyone realizing they were doing it. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She placed her documents on the table and looked at each of us in turn. "No one signs anything today unless I instruct you to," she said evenly. "We will proceed in order." She began reading. Lenora's name came first. $1 million. Conditional upon signing a waiver of claims. Lenora barely glanced at the page before she picked up the pen. "Wait," I said quietly. She hesitated, just for a second, then shook her head. "It's fine," she whispered. "I just want this over with." The pen scratched across paper. Prescott's turn followed. Marlowe read out his share, the control clauses, the language referencing a distribution protocol filed offshore. Prescott applauded lightly, satisfied, his smile broadening as if the room had just confirmed what he already knew. Then Marlowe looked at me. "Aria Blackwell," she said. $1. She knows why." Prescott laughed openly this time. "That should cover a cup of coffee downstairs," he said, glancing around the table. "Or maybe half of one." I didn't respond. Marlowe closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Ms. Blackwell, are you in possession of the key to Safety Deposit Box 91 at Coastal Federal Bank?" "Yes," I said. "And do you consent to activate the sealed codicil associated with that box?" I stood and took the brass key from my pocket. The metal caught the light as I held it up. "Yes." The word landed hard. The air shifted. Even Prescott stopped smiling. Marlowe nodded once. "Then let the record reflect that the dollar was not an inheritance," she said. "It was consideration, a binding element required to transfer authority." She turned a page. "Aria Blackwell is not a beneficiary. She is the sole trustee of the blind trust established under Dorian Blackwell's direction, with full voting rights, asset control, and the authority to initiate audits and freezes." Prescott surged to his feet. "That's impossible. We have waivers." Marlowe lifted the document Lenora had signed moments earlier. "This waiver," she said calmly, "contains a compliance clause. By accepting funds, the signer consents to full disclosure under federal anti-money laundering statutes." Serafina's composure cracked. "You can't do this," she said sharply. "This is extortion." Before Marlowe could respond, the man in the corner stood. He reached into his jacket and produced a badge. "Federal agent," he said clearly. We have a warrant to seize electronic devices and secure all records related to the Blackwell Family Foundation. My team is on its way up." The room erupted. Prescott's face drained of color. Serafina screamed, not in fear, but in outrage, the sound of reputation collapsing in real time. Lenora stared at the paper in front of her, as if it had just learned to speak. She turned to me. "Arya, please," she said, her voice breaking. "We're sisters." I met her gaze. "We share DNA," I said. "Nothing else." I walked to the head of the table and placed the $1 bill in front of Prescott, setting the key beside it. "It only takes $1, I said quietly, "to buy the truth." Then I turned and left. The doors closed behind me, sealing in the chaos. Outside, the hallway was calm, sunlight spilling across the floor. I paused only once, steadying my breath, before continuing toward the elevator. Later, after the noise faded and the headlines sharpened, I used my authority as trustee to do what should have been done years ago. The foundation was rebuilt to serve its purpose. The truth restored Dorian's legacy more honestly than silence ever could. For the first time in my life, I moved without asking permission. If you listened to this story from beginning to end, tell me what you think. Did it stay with you? What kind of stories should I tell next? Stories about power, about family, about women who refuse to disappear? If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe so you can hear more stories from other women who found their voices when it mattered most.